What is going on, everybody? That name is wrong, actually. This is not the Narcotraficantes episode or Narcos Satanistas. I gotta change the name. Urban Legends, the truth. And it's covered up by my shirt. More styles. No, we need to change the color. No, I want the color of this to be whatever. Bam, that works better. Okay, sorry about that. Technical difficulties. Today in news, or this week in news, it's a very sad one. Professor McGonagall has passed. The actress who played her passed away yesterday. Sad news. By the time this comes out, it'll be 2 weeks from when it happened. So I'm sorry about that. But yes, don't think I have any Mexico updates. Actually, I did have one. But I forgot it. That's my own fault. I should have wrote it down. Anyways, so this week we are going to talk about urban legends. Are they real or just that, legends? So that's what we're going to talk about. That's the subject. Are urban legends real? Do they have some basis in truth? A lot of urban legends do have a basis in truth, but sometimes it's just made up because it's a story from a friend of a friend, or it's just because wherever you live, there's just a spooky house at the end of the corner, and then stories get made up over imaginative kids create stories, things like that. But what we're going to talk about are three stories that are urban legends that are actually true, that have happened. So let's begin. This idea was given to me by a follower from TikTok. So if you have any stories or ideas, let me know and I will look into them. The message that started this was one about a bus crash that I thought I knew the story about. And it's one of the most famous stories in Texas about a bus crash. And if you live in the San Antonio area, you've definitely heard this story. They're the haunted railroad tracks in San Antonio. So that's if you live there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So let's begin. Let's start there, should I say. In a small town on a gloomy day, a nun was bringing some kids back from a field trip. Confident that the dark, gloomy weather would not hinder them on their return home, as the sun was setting in the background, they started up the bus with the children sleeping. The bus's engine rumbled through the night down Shane Road. As it approached the intersection, the engine began to fail and stalled in the most unfortunate of places, on some train tracks. As the nun tried, she looked back to the children to see if the commotion had awoken them. She proceeded to try again to start the bus. Again, but it was in vain and refused to start. As she continued to try to get the bus started, she heard an all too familiar sound of a train in the distance. As panic set in, she was unable to see a train. So, believing it was a train that had already passed, so she thought it was a train that passed. She thought they got there right as it passed already, so they were good, right? Within moments, she realized that she was wrong. A train with a broken headlight was barreling down on the poor bus. The nun knew she had no time to get the children off the bus. With a last effort, she tried the engine again. With it starting a glimmer of hope, the bus roared to life and quickly stalled again. Most likely, she flooded the engine. It came on and boom, died again. The conductor of the train, noticing the bus at the last moment, tried in vain to stop the train. Little known fact, did you know that it can take a train up to 1 mile to stop? So by the time they noticed the train, or by the time the conductor noticed the bus, it would have been too late. The train drove right through the bus full of kids. The nun was thrown from the bus through the front window, injured but alive. As for the children, they were not as lucky. Days later, the headline in the San Antonio Express read, "Bus train death toll likely to go as high as 30." The nun, weeks after recovering, could not live with the guilt of being the only survivor. She returned to the tracks where it all happened, parked her car, and waited. Right after sunset, off in the distance, she spotted the headlamp of an oncoming train. As she closed her eyes and resigned to her fate, she began to hear whispers. As they grew louder, she recognized the sound of children. The same children who died the week prior, her car suddenly began to move and roll forward on its own, as if being pushed by some unknown force. Her car clearing the tracks and the train, she jumped out and looked around to see if anyone was around. When she looked at her car, she saw little handprints. The spirits of the children that passed had rescued her. After this happened, the nun opened up an orphanage until her last days. Since that day, the legend of the ghost tracks with the children protecting those that stopped on the tracks began. Anyone that visits the train tracks have claimed to have heard the whispers of small children surrounding the car and have felt the push going over the tracks. After clearing the tracks and finding a safe place to park, they see handprints on the back of their car, just like the nun did. Is there any chance that this story is real? So, like I said, if you live in San Antonio, you've heard this story. How real do you think this story is? I'm going to tell you. Listen. Even though many have claimed that the story is real, having heard it since they were children, some versions it's not a nun but a regular bus driver, so with different variations it might be false. Different versions happen at either early morning or at sunset, with some versions being that most of the children were saved and only 10 passed. Every story has a different outcome. It's either the streets in the area were named after the children or an orphanage was opened in their honor. It's easy to believe that the streets were named after the kids, with the streets being named Bobby Allen, Nancy Carroll, and Cindy Sue Way. The truth is, it's all false. The real story takes place in Salt Lake City, Utah, and also in Alton, Texas. And I know just pissed off a lot of San Antonio people. But that story that you've heard since you were a child is false. And this is what really happened. One of those accidents was before the other. So one was before the other, right? The headline was real, but it was from Utah. So the headline that said the death toll could be as high as 30, that was a real headline that ran, but it was referencing the bus accident in Utah. The real story was on the 1st of December in 1938. A bus filled with 37 teenagers was hit by a train on a foggy winter day. The bus driver never saw the train or heard the train as it barreled down at them at 50 miles an hour. The bus driver was not able to get the bus clear of the tracks, and the train crew tried to stop the train but were not able to. Like I said, it takes a mile to stop a train. 22 teens died that day. It was one of the worst bus accidents in U.S. history at the time. With it being the worst, it was in all the newspapers, which is how you can find it in the San Antonio Express. And over time, memories merged and it led to people remembering it happening in San Antonio. So, like I said, you can find the article, the headline. It's a real headline, but it was referencing Utah. So that explains the mix up, but what about the mystery of the car moving? That can be easily explained by civil engineers. When they installed an extra rail line, they had accidentally paved over a very slight incline that caused cars to roll. So whenever people put the cars in neutral to see if the ghost children would push their cars, it was actually they were on the slightest incline that slowly rolled their cars clear of the tracks. And you might say, what about the handprints? How many times do you touch your car? The fingerprints could be yours. There's so many times people touch their cars without realizing it. And when you go and dust it, you're going to see handprints. I'm pretty sure if I go dust my car right now, you'll see my handprints all over it. That explains the Utah mix up. What about Alton, Texas? So I mentioned two of them, right? One was before the other. So Alton was way back in the, Utah was way back in the day. And what kept the legend alive was another incident in Alton, Texas, which brought it back to the forefront on everyone's mind. So the one in Alton, Texas. The bus accident was in September 21st, 1989. It would reignite the bus legend, especially since it was in Texas. The bus was carrying 81 passengers, mostly middle schoolers and high schoolers. Thursday morning, just as the bus picked up the last student and proceeded to make its way to the school, was driving down Farm to Market 676, also known as 5 Mile Road. As the bus approached a stop sign and seeing the way was clear with a delivery truck coming from another direction to stop, so they reached the bus stop or the stop sign, and there was a delivery truck off in the distance, so they thought they would clear it, right? The bus goes through the stop, and so did the delivery truck, having run the stop sign. The truck was a Dr. Pepper truck that came out of the Valley Coca Cola Bottling Company, which is a weird combination. Dr. Pepper is an independent company that had a distribution contract with Coca Cola. So before anyone says that it was all Dr. Pepper, no, hold on. It was a Coca Cola. Technically, it was a Dr. Pepper branded truck, but they were coming out of Coca Cola. So most likely it was Coca Cola's drivers and everything. Don't come at me, Coke. I own shares in your stock, but I also own shares in Dr. Pepper too. So hey, Dr. Pepper's my. I was about to hold up a can of Coke and say like, "See, I'm drinking Dr. Pepper, but it's a Fanta, which is a Coke product." So sorry about that. I also just had to say that too because got to keep everything as accurate as I can, right? The collision pushed the bus into a caliche, which is an old mining hole, which was about 10 feet or 30 meters, which was about 10 feet. I wrote that wrong. Which had about 10 feet or 30 meters of water in it. So it was an old mining hole where they used to like deposit their refuse for the mines, right? And it had a pool of water in it. As water began entering the bus through the open windows, quickly within less than a minute, the bus was filled with water. The reason for this was because the front window and door were dislodged, and that let the water in. The murky waters of the caliche made it difficult for the students to see and find their way out. With no air pocket and no escape, this is one of the few crashes in U.S. history where the cause of death was drowning or asphyxiation. So it's one of the few, any kind of car accident, automobile accident, where they didn't die from the accident. They died from drowning or asphyxiation. And the kids couldn't get out because this was an older bus. It's back in, when was it? When did I say it was? If I'm not mistaken, the bus that they were using was built in like the 70s. So it was like 10 years old. And the windows were really small, so they couldn't even climb through the windows. It's not like the buses we have today with knockout windows. They give it a nice little push and the window falls out. This was before that. This is probably the reason why we have that. Now, not all students died. Yes, there was no escape for 21 students. 49 were injured. None of those that died suffered severe trauma, preventing them from escaping. As a result of the two companies being involved, it resulted in a huge lawsuit. The driver was charged in court with 21 counts of homicide by negligence. A jury acquitted him on all counts in 1993. Once it was all done, he did an interview and said he stayed to himself before he spent some time in a mental hospital. He never got over the incident and felt tremendous guilt for those that died. Once everything had finished, he said he basically became a recluse. He wasn't going out because people were blaming him. And to be fair, he was driving the truck, the delivery truck. He could have been distracted for any number of reasons. He could have got a call over the radio for dispatch saying that he had to go do a second delivery or whatever, right? He could have been distracted for a number of reasons. Or he could have blown that stop sign every day at that exact time because there was no one else around. And it just so happened that there was a bus there this time. There's many reasons. Who knows why he wasn't paying attention and barreled into that car or barreled into that bus. The lawsuit paid out $133 million settlements. Each family received $4.5 million each. Another company involved paid $23 million also. The payout was for 30 brothers and sisters receiving trust funds ranging from $50 to $250,000, each with the parents getting the remainder. All the brothers and sisters of all the kids that had brothers and sisters, their families received 4.5 million, and the brothers and sisters out of all that money received anywhere from $50 to $250,000. and the parents got the rest. The community had an opinion about the settlement, with the families buying cars and houses. Why was this an issue? It was because some were expecting the families to give money to the community. So, yeah, people were pissed off that they received that much money and they never, like, the community never saw a dime. But it was for the families that had a tragic accident, you know? They lost family members, they lost children. But I can also see the flip side of it where they're like, set up a college fund for future kids because now there's a bunch of arguments to be had, right? But yeah, so it was their money to do with as they pleased, however they wanted to. But, anyways, those two tragic events helped to keep the legend alive in San Antonio. So let's move on to the next legend. So that's insane. But like I said, that's the real story of the San Antonio ghost tracks. It's not real. It's just an urban legend from two different stories. One started it and the other one kept it going. The next urban legend to talk about is the Screaming Bridge, located in Arlington, Texas, which is right down the street from where I'm at. As the legend goes, the bridge is the location of a crash from the 60s. Many people died in a multi car accident where you can still hear the screams of those that died. Or that a truck full of teenagers returning from a football game, once they reached the bridge, they proceeded to cross it, and from the opposite end, a vehicle came from the other side. Before either vehicle could react, they crashed. Both cars burst into flames and burned everyone, and the bridge was also burned down. Those are two short stories about the legend of that bridge. But everything that's involved with it is that cars had an accident on this bridge because it was supposedly just a one-way road or a one-way bridge. That's a short one, isn't it? The truth is that it's two different accidents that are melded together. The real accident that it's based on happened on February 4th, 1961. A car full of six teenage girls flew off a burned down bridge. The details go they were returning from a movie joyriding. They reached the bridge going at about 45 miles an hour. The way the road had an incline from Arlington to Bedford Road, coupled with the darkness of the night, it stopped them from seeing that the bridge was out. So they didn't know the bridge was out. Well, they lived in the area, so they should have known it was out because it's been out for a while, right? We'll get into that later. But they were having fun. They were cruising around having fun. They just got out of the movies. It was kids being kids. At 9:30 at night, they left the road and impacted with the other side of the ravine, coming to rest upside down. Out of the six, two died instantly: Mary Lou Goldner, age 16, and Claudie Jean Reeves, age 17. The deaths do not end there. By 2 a.m. Sunday morning, another one was announced dead. Kathy Fleming had passed right before reaching Baylor Hospital. That left three survivors: Donna Post, Dorothy Epstein, and Joanne Anderson, with multiple injuries, fractures, and concussions, and one of them had to undergo emergency brain surgery. The next day, the headlines read, "Death Bridge Involved in Probe Revealed Another Teen Had Stopped." So when the headline comes out, it's found out that there was somebody else there. His name was Bill Young. He had actually slowed down before the train just beyond the bridge, and he noticed that the bridge was out. He tried he tried to warn the girls that the bridge was out and started honking. It could have had the opposite effect and scared them into going over. So, six young girls, random guy honking at them, frantically honking at them to get their attention. They probably panicked and kept going. But he was the one that called the police and the ambulance to let them know of the accident. Six ambulances had shown up to take the girls to the hospital in Arlington to receive care before going to Baylor. So they stopped first at Arlington Hospital and then they went to Baylor, which is, with none of them having ID, they had to wait for Dorothy Epstein to regain consciousness. The bridge had been previously burned, and the county fire marshal Mason Langford had investigated with police chief, had concluded that either hobos or teens had been responsible for the fires 2 years earlier. So 2 years before that, the bridge had already been burned down. The fire marshal and the police chief had already conducted an investigation, and they were like, either some random teens or some homeless people lit a fire and the bridge burned. Case closed, right? So they put up barricades. They had been placed on both sides, and on that night they were missing for some reason. So the barricades they had there were probably just some little or they're called, like horse stable barricades or horse barricades, because it's just two A-frames with the pole in the middle standing up, right? Highway patrolmen eventually were able to figure out those responsible for the bridge being out. So after the accident, they reinvestigated again, and they were able to figure out who actually burned the bridge, and it was teenagers. The culprits were four high school kids from Arlington: Clinton Verse, Tracy Stanley, Ronald Max Moore, and Richard Truett Rivers are the four kids involved. So they're from Arlington, and their names are Clinton Verse, Tracy Stanley, Ronald Max Moore, and Richard Truett Rivers. These kids were brought before a grand jury, which declined to bring charges against the young men. Their attorney said that their clients were driving down the road on January 27th, 1961, when one of them said that they should set fire to the bridge, supposedly as a prank, or some people believe it. They had other reasons for burning down the bridge. One of them being it was to keep the local black community of Moiser Valley from coming to North Arlington. Their parents painted a picture that they were good kids and were just playing pranks, as young kids do, not wanting to do anything malicious. So they were just playing pranks, harmless pranks, right? Pranks. They weren't trying to cause anything to happen. But they burned a bridge down, so something could have happened, right? Instead, the jury had asked that instead of coming for these kids, it'll be better to find out who had taken the barricades. So they dismissed the case, and they're like, look, instead of trying these kids for this, why don't we figure out who took the barricade? They never did figure it out. The bridge had never been replaced. Instead, in its place, they had placed large drainage tunnels to cover it up, covered in asphalt until another fatal accident involving two women and a train at that crossing. So that same area that they covered up and made kind of like a bridge, because it was covered, it was tunnels and covered in asphalt, so it was kind of like another bridge or road, was there. And then another accident. On March 10th, 1994, Raylene Johnston and Tammy Lynn Dodson tried to race the train. So in other words, they tried to beat the train. They tried to pass the tracks before the train got there. Sadly, they did not make it. One was thrown from the truck. The other had been trapped in the burning truck. After that accident, it was closed to all traffic, and the legend had moved to another bridge nearby. So that since that bridge was no longer, accessible, story just moved on to another bridge, which was down the road. They're like, oh, this is the bridge. But no, it was actually another bridge down the road. But nothing happened there. It's the main bridge that we're talking about. Construction of the Trinity Boulevard, it was mostly destroyed, but the main portion of the bridge remains and is isolated. It continues to draw paranormal investigators, hikers, and teens looking for a scare and to see if they could hear the screams. Another legend that turns out to have some truth. So yeah, I know where it's at. It's a difficult hike to get there. Not too difficult, but I could get there. And it is like out. So there is one part of it, but it's mainly just like a T, a pillar in the ground, part of the bridge, and it's out on both ends. So I will try to get there whenever I can to take pictures there and show y'all. And I'll post it to Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, so y'all can see. Looks like this episode is going to be short because I'm almost done. But that's just how it goes. Because urban legends, we could do so many stories, and they're usually short stories because that's what gets the gripping stories. That's what gets you into them, because they're short, but they have details, and then they just stop. And then it leaves you wanting more, which is what the appeal is of most urban legends. So let's finish this off. For the final legend, we go to Terrell, Texas. The legend goes that in 1903, near the old Crane property, the local children started going missing. and all that was left behind was candy wrappers signed by the Candy Lady. So I've heard this story. Like I said, I've done research on all sorts of stories. I've been hearing ghost stories since I was a child. The Candy Lady is a famous one. Supposedly it's around Halloween, which we're coming up to. By the time this episode comes out, it'll be well into October. The Candy Lady. Some children in town found candy wrappers sitting on their windowsills. With the children going missing and others being tempted with candy, the local sheriff started a search for whoever could find the person that was responsible. Late one night, the sheriff went out with the intent of finding this Candy Lady. In the early morning, a local was driving along the road and spotted something off in the distance, in a ditch. Upon closer inspection, it was discovered that it was the sheriff, with forks stabbed into his eyes and his pockets stuffed with candy. As the children kept going missing and it was getting closer to Halloween, it was getting more and more serious to find the Candy Lady. A farmer had found rotten teeth in his field, so small they could only belong to a small child. After Halloween, all the candy stopped appearing and the children stopped going missing. So the Candy Lady remained elusive, and a legend destined to never be solved and to keep returning every Halloween to take more and more children. As chilling as that is, the real story is this. In 1871, Terrell Tech Sarah Crane was born. And that's all I can find about her. It's because it's way back in 1871, right? But she eventually wed a man named Leonard, and he was just a simple farmer. They eventually had a child named Marcella, and at the age of 5, tragedy struck, and she died in a tragic accident in one of his fields. Clara became inconsolable and blamed her husband for the accident, mainly because he had been drinking. So he was supposed to be watching her. He'd been drinking. Something happened, and their daughter died. 2 years had passed, and Clara had decided that she was going to take revenge. She laced his favorite treats with poison, which was caramel candy. He died after eating the candy. The next day, a neighbor came by to check on Clara and noticed that something quite wasn't right. So they called Fred Springer, who was the sheriff, and he took her into custody because she was also becoming agitated and aggressive. So they knew something was up, and she was acting out. She was lashing out, right? So she most likely had a mental break, right? After what she had done had been discovered, she went on trial for first-degree murder. She never served for murder, but instead she was incarcerated to life in the North Texas Lunatic Asylum, now known as Terrell State Hospital. So I'm also going to take a wild guess is that the North Texas Lunatic Asylum is a ghost story legend beacon because those asylums back in the day, those lunatic asylums, they were notorious for the way they treated their people. Countless people went in, countless people never came back out. They're supposedly the most haunted places on the planet. There's so many scary movies that take place in an abandoned lunatic asylum, a mental asylum. So, Terrell State Hospital, that might even be the next one we look up, right? But she was released from there in 1899 due to overcrowding. And that's where the legend begins. Because after she was released, that's where the story began in like 1903. Kids became missing, and then it starts all again, right? Or it starts again from where I started this story off. So that is it. That is all I got. I hope you like the story. Those are 3 different legends that are based in Texas that are real. They're not all urban legends are urban legends. These urban legends actually happened. There's evidence, there's proof. Now, the parts afterwards, that is up to you to decide. So, if you want to go to Terrell, Texas around Halloween and you find some candy signed by the Candy Lady, it may not be an urban legend because we know it's true, right? And she was released. But again, she'd also be over 100 years old, so who knows, right? And Screaming Bridge, it's a real bridge where supposedly to this day you can hear the screams of the people who have passed there from their accidents. Horrible accidents. A car full of teenagers flew off a bridge and crashed into a burning heap. 3 of them passed away, 3 of them survived. And then years later, a train crashed and killed one person. saved one person. One person got thrown, the other one got trapped, died, right? So supposedly you can hear the screams of the people that suffered there. And the first story, the bus accident, like I said, civil engineers have proven that that's what happened after they covered it up, after they, added an extra rail line, paved over it. They fixed the incline. So now you park on there, be careful because you ain't rolling. So there's no rolling anymore. So that one's completely been debunked. So that is it. I will see y'all next time. And remember, it's spooky season now. We are into Halloween. So the stories are going to get more and more ghost stories. We're going to get more into it now. And remember, you can find me on TikTok. I'll go live stream Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights there. So come check it out. And I will see y'all next time. Stay spooky, everybody.